Thank you, Kevin. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Milton Southwest number 11 and number 12 public school boundary review. My name is Gord Truffin. I'm a superintendent of education with the Halton District School Board, and it has been my pleasure to be co-chair of this boundary review where we studied Milton number 11 and 12. We welcome a number of staff this evening and parents. But first and foremost, I would like to introduce my co-chair, Trustee Jean Gray, who would like to all acknowledge the land this evening. Over to you, Jean.
Thank you very much. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaran and the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Gray. So folks, tonight we are going to be giving you a lot of information for about an hour from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And we've reserved about a half an hour to take any questions that you may have. And those questions were, the way to ask a question was sent to you via email, and it's a simple form to submit your question. We're going to talk about the Boundary Review Committee. We're going to be presenting to you the three preferred options that we have for Milton's number 11 and 12. And we will also talk about next steps. But first, I would like to turn it over to our Director of Education, Stuart Miller. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Director Miller.
Thank you, Gord. And I want to welcome you all to this. It's an important evening. It's important for you to take a look at these selections and what the Boundary Review Committee has come up with in terms of what they are presenting this evening. I first of all, though, want to thank the Boundary Review Committee. This is a group of parents who have gone over and above to try to help us set appropriate boundaries that make sense for the students in this area for both Milton number 11 and Milton number 12. You know, in Milton, it seems like, I know I'm exaggerating, but it seems like we do a boundary review about every month in Milton because the schools come fast and furious. And unfortunately, we're unable to keep up with the build, so we're constantly moving kids around. But that's a bigger problem for a different day involving the Ministry of Ed, construction companies, etc., and so on. But this is a good night. This is a night to say, here's the boundaries, and it's for you as parents. It's the first spark you see for your kids that they're going to get going to a new school soon. And they'll be in brand new buildings, brand new facilities with pretty motivated and determined staff to make it the best experience for your children. We've been through a pretty rough 13, 14 months, I think, as a world we have, but we're not immune to that here in Halton. And so, you know, we need things to look forward to, and this is certainly something to look very much forward to. So I hope you can stay for the whole evening and provide your input, because that makes for a better boundary and a better decision. I know they'll go through the process, but again, I want to thank the Boundary Review Committee. You know, this in Milton, the people of Milton are, shall we say, less adversarial than other places. But this still takes great courage for the review committee for these parents to come forward and say, here's what I think, here's what we should do, here's what we shouldn't do. And sometimes there's lively debates there, and sometimes there's disagreement from the public with the Boundary Review Committee and individuals on the Boundary Review Committee. So it takes great courage and integrity to be part of that. So I really, really want to thank the Boundary Review Committee for doing this. I absolutely believe that education is a partnership between the community and us in the education sector. And the only way our kids benefit is if we work together. And this is a prime example of where we have worked together. So with that, I'll turn it back to Gord to get it going. And again, thank you to everyone coming out, and thank you to the Boundary Review Committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Miller. And I do want to mention, I think it's only appropriate. I know you have been a part of many boundary reviews the last number of years, probably 10, and you've always been very, very supportive. And it is your last boundary review because you're retiring soon. So I know on behalf of the staff, we really do appreciate your support and supporting us during these boundary reviews. So thank you very much, Director Miller.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Superintendent Truffin. And I don't know how many boundary reviews I saw in Milton, dozens. And it is my last one, but I look forward to coming back someday and seeing these kids in these brand new schools. And I will absolutely do that because that's what we live for, is to see them in these buildings. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Director Miller. Next, I would like to introduce our trustees for the evening. We have Trustee Daniele, who is a Milton trustee for Wards 1 and 2, Trustee Garretts, who's a trustee for Wards 3 and 4, and as you've already met, Trustee Gray, who is Halton Hills trustee Wards 1 to 4, and co-chair of this boundary review committee with myself. So I will turn it over to our trustees. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. Sorry, Heather. Thank you so much, Superintendent Truffin. I'll be very brief. I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. As Gordon and Stuart have said, we do a lot of boundary reviews in Milton, and one of the best things, we get it right through public input. And you're taking the time to come out tonight and give up your Tuesday night to be here and look at what we've done and let us know if we've gotten it right is crucial. So I just want to say thank you so much for that. Over to you, Trustee Garretts.
Thank you, Trustee Daniele, my partner in crime for Milton. I just want to let everyone know that today we were supposed to have a groundbreaking ceremony for Milton number 11. And unfortunately, well, it's COVID. So I was out in the area getting videotaped just this morning. And we're going to do a groundbreaking, if you will, via virtual, like everything else this year. So stay tuned for that on the HDSB website. It'll be out in probably a week or so, and you can take a look at that. Super excited about Milton number 11 and 12, of course. And thank you very much to our community for supporting all of this and being there for HDSB and you know, guiding us through this. We can't do it without the community and without your input. So thanks again. Over to you, Trustee Gray.
Thank you, Trustee Garretts. Just wanted to echo the sentiments of Director Miller earlier this evening when he spoke about the involvement and the great wisdom coming to us from the volunteer community committee members on the Boundary Review Committee. They've given up lots of time in the last number of months to gather ideas from their community and to contribute their ideas at our boundary review meetings. So thank you so very much. I would also, though, be remiss if I did not extend a huge amount of thanks to the staff who have worked tirelessly to provide us with first-rate information, data, and for all of their planning of the meetings that we have had so far. So thanks go to staff members Mitch Gundy, Michelle Degar, and of course, Fred Thibault. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Trustee Daniele, Garretts, and Gray. Appreciate that. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to our General Manager, Fred Thibault, who's going to talk about just the boundary review process in general. And I will turn it over to you, Fred. Thanks very much.
Good evening, everyone. So again, my name is Frederick Thibault. I'm the General Manager of Planning at the Halton District School Board, and I'll be taking you through some of the subject matter of the boundary review that we've gone through. So we'll talk about a little about the process, the objectives, and the purpose of the review, and then we'll go through some of the options that we developed collaboratively with our boundary review committee. So to start us off, the first thing that we want to discuss is really the start of this entire process. So in October of 21st of 2020, the Board of Trustees directed staff to undertake a boundary review for Milton 11-12 collaboratively, so both schools at the same time, to define the new boundaries for these new schools that were funded by the Ministry of Education. So the motion is up here on the screen, and essentially what it's looking for is that staff working collaboratively with a established boundary review committee define boundaries for both Milton 11 and Milton 12. Now, one of the, as I mentioned earlier, was really about creating these new boundaries for these schools, as right now the majority of them are being held at either Viola Desmond or Hawthorne Village. And one of the challenges that we were having as part of the current accommodation pressures in the town of Milton is that a lot of these students were, albeit they were directed to Viola Desmond, they were had to be directed to other schools outside of their community because of the extreme pressures that were happening. So now, thankfully, as part of this review, now that we have these two new schools that are proposed and under construction, we're able to redefine these boundaries and redirect students within their community. So in doing this, what we first did is we established a study area to look exactly what geography we wanted to review in order to define these boundaries. And roughly speaking, what you see on the screen here outlined in a light blue is that study area of the geography that we were looking to establish new boundaries within. And generally speaking, it's to the west bound by Tremaine Road, to the east, James Snow Parkway, to the south, Britannia Road, to the north, Louis Saint Laurent, and south of Britannia, we were also reviewing a large rural area that has historically been directed to schools in North Milton. And we saw this as an opportunity to perhaps bring students closer to home or closer to their school in terms of overall travel time. Now, with regards to communicating these initiatives and providing this information to the community, as well as giving announcements as to what the results of the boundary review would be as we move through the process, we established 3 key pillars of communication. One being our boundary study webpage, which in this webpage, and there's a link here on the presentation, and it can also be accessed on our main webpage, we have all of the minutes and all of the information with regards to the options that were developed as part of this process, as well as updates as to what was happening throughout our review and what will be happening. We also have a dedicated email that you can send your questions, which is listed here on screen. And we also use Cindermill Communications to reach out to our community members to let them know when we're having meetings such as the one tonight, and also to advise them of what's happening in terms of next steps and outcomes of the review. So since the initiation of this process, we've since had 4 boundary review committee meetings. And throughout that process, what we did is we reviewed initial options and developed a number of additional options with our committee members. And now tonight, we're here to present to you the shortlisted 3 options that we would like to receive feedback on and advance the next steps in this process, which we'll discuss later on in the meeting tonight. So with that, I will hand it back over to Superintendent Truffin to walk us through the boundary review committee.
Thank you very much, and appreciate that overview. Folks, so I think this is the opportunity where I'm just going to briefly explain the boundary review committee. And if there are some, most valuable people on a committee, it would be these parents. Parents have volunteered their time, hours of their time, to work with board staff on developing options. And I can tell you, we had over 12 options. Well, the BRC created over 12 options for the steering committee to consider. And we have worked with them, and they have 3 preferred options that I know we're going to be showing you later today. But really, I know the trustees have thanked you, their directors thank you, but it really is sincere appreciation, the number of hours that you've spent with us, volunteering your time. We had a snow day in February. Virtually, we even had a snow day. So your work, your volunteerism, and your just your sincere appreciation for the Milton community and your work to do with the Milton community is very much appreciated. So next slide, please, Fred. What is the mandate of the Boundary Review Committee? So it represents all of the students, and we make it very clear that you're here not for your own voice of your own children, but you're there for the school community that you represent. And certainly our BRC worked collaboratively to provide us feedback, the steering committee, and we came up with many options for consideration for the steering committee. We worked collaboratively. We arrived at options not by voting, but by consensus and by collaborating together. And just a tremendous resource. These parents, the parents that were on the Boundary Review Committee, know the school community, they know the Milton community, and really we think that the options that we're presenting tonight are great options to present and to have boundaries that will last for many years to come. Next slide, please. So the affected schools, so in part of our admin procedure is if we think a school is going to be impacted by potential boundaries, we would like to have 2 representatives from every school. And we work in coordination with the school principal and the school council chair. So it might be the school council chair, it might be someone on the school council, or it might not be. But it is 2 parents that are representative of that school. And we want 2 parents from each school. And the 10 schools that you see on that list are the schools that could potentially be impacted by the options. And some schools might be impacted greatly, like there, you know, we have a student population growth at Viola, Desmond, and Boyne. So those kids might be a little more impacted, families, by switching schools. But even we looked at the opportunity, E.W. Foster and Sam Sherritt, where kids from some of the rural areas, South Milton, have been going to those schools for many, many years. And you're going to see some options tonight. Well, you know what? It makes more sense to put them in a school that is closer to their home. So next slide, please. It is my pleasure. We always want to have a parent speak to the parents of the Milton community. And it's my pleasure to introduce Wynn Brockway, who is a parent and school council chair at Boyne Public School. And Wynn has agreed, I asked, and she agreed to speak to you this evening. So Wynn, we thank you again for taking time away from your family and speaking to us this evening. So over to you, Wynn. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I just want to say thank you to the parents that are joining us tonight. I think it's a very bold thing, well, not bold, I should say, but very smart thing for you to do as a parent who has now sat on school council for 3 years at Boyne. I have 2 small children, so I never really get information from them at the end of the day. So I always felt it was necessary to be part of the community, to be able to know what's going on, and also to have our say, because at the end of the day, when we tell a 4-year-old what to tell their teacher, it doesn't always come out that way. I also feel that this is actually my second boundary review committee that I've sat on, and I really enjoyed the process the first time. And now that we're dealing with 2 elementary schools that were very close to Boyne and would impact our population, in the fact that our boundaries are so fluid these days because we have so much growth going on, I really want to make sure that the Boyne voice was heard, as well as all of our parents. And we know that with real estate and where people are living, they're moving around a lot more, that we want to make sure that these schools are accessible to the families and to the kids, and that it's not difficult to know where your boundaries are to try and maybe keep your kids in a school versus having to move them just because you moved across the street. So I really feel like it was a great opportunity to be really part of the solution in all of this. Boyne being one of the somewhat newer schools next to Viola Desmond has really understood, I guess, and felt the back and forth, or I guess the ups and downs of boundary reviews. And so I guess as being a parent, the pros and cons that we look at on our committee really is not only putting ourselves in the shoes of our parents at our own schools, but really the community as a whole. We really are trying to make sure that our schools and our students have a sense of community when they're there. So we really do try to make sure that their boundaries, their neighborhoods, the people that they're living close to are also part of their school community. And it's really important that as parents, not only are we trying to foster that sense of family, but also that sense of community with our kids. And so I think a lot of the pros and cons of being on boundary review is trying to understand someone else's point of view and being open to it. And I must say our committee has been excellent in doing so. Sometimes we're louder with some options than others, but it's great that as a parent, we're all open. We're open to other people's opinions, and I think that's really, really great. Some of the things we look at always is how many times maybe a child has already moved schools due to boundary review, overpopulation at schools, and how soon that'll occur. Nobody really wants to go to a new school and then have to move to another school within a year or two. So as a committee member, we're very vigilant of that, because not only do adults not like moving, but it's really hard for your kids as well. So we really are trying to take the kids' well-being and their mentality, their mental being really into the whole decision making of it all. I think that's a lot of information. Back to you, Gord, unless you have anything else.
Wynne, thank you very, very much for joining this evening. And again, sincere appreciation for the many hours that you and the BRC spent, not only during the meeting time, but also disseminating a lot of all the information that we give you. So thank you very much, Wynne. Appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it.
Excellent. So Fred's going to present again. Thank you, Fred. So we have our boundary review committee, and then we have a boundary review steering committee. And really you've already met a lot of the steering committee this evening. And so really the role of the boundary review committee is to work on options for consideration to present to the steering committee. And one of the biggest mandates for the steering committee is to work with the BRC to identify 2 or 3 options. And then it's for the boundary review steering committee to recommend a preferred option to the director of education. And we're going to get into next steps, but that's really ultimately the biggest role for the steering committee is taking all the information from the boundary review committee and identifying that preferred option for the director consider to present to the trustees who vote on the option. So I will quickly just let you know who is on the steering committee. And next slide, please. Thank you very much. So you've already met Trustee Gray and myself. We are the co-chairs of the Boundary Review Committee. And of course, we have the trustees who are impacted. Trustee Donna Agnelli, Trustee Garrett's, Heather Garrett's, you've already met them. Someone who you haven't met, the chair of the steering committee is Superintendent Jackie Newton. She's on camera, but if you want to say hello, you can, Jackie. You won't be on camera unless you say hi.
Hello.
There you go. We also have, and so Jackie is chair of the BRSC, the steering committee. We also have Superintendent Mark Zonnefeld.
Good evening, everyone.
And certainly Mark and Jackie have joined us for all the BRC meetings. Superintendent of Program, Tina Salmini. Superintendent of Student Services, Colette Ruddock. Our Superintendent of Business, our CFO is Roxana Nagoy. Executive Officer of Facilities is Ian Gadet. They have been mostly they're a resource on the back end, behind the scenes. They're not with us this evening, nor do they typically attend the boundary review committees, but we are in constant communication with them in terms of asking questions, and they give us answers. And then finally, you've already met General Manager Fred Thibault, and in the planning department, and Michelle Degar and Mitch Gundy, who are truly do a tremendous amount of work for these boundary reviews. So now I'm going to turn it back over to you, General Manager Thibault, to talk about our options. Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, Superintendent Truffin. So the first thing we'd like to do as part of this section of the presentation is really go over some of the key evaluation criteria that the BRC, as well as the Boundary Review Steering Committee, reviewed in developing a lot of these options, and how we reached to the point of providing you with these 3 shortlisted options for your consideration and feedback. So based on our administrative procedure and our policies, we have 8 defined criteria that we review, and I'll go over them very quickly tonight, but one of the main ones is really the viability of the programs that we're creating. So as we're distributing students in different schools, we really want to make sure that the number of students that are going to be attending that school is large enough that we can support our students and having flexibility in the overall size of the school, where we don't want a school that's too large or too small specifically. Another key thing that was touched upon a few times already tonight is making sure that when we're defining these boundaries, we're really creating this neighborhood scale where students are able to walk and roll to school and not rely entirely on busing, and can feel part of that overall community and neighborhood area. We also want to make sure that, as best as we can, create stable long-term boundaries where, to the best of our abilities, acknowledging that this is an area of very high growth in Milton, that we're not doing boundary reviews every other year, and that we're trying to make sure that students have some stability in the schools that they're going to within their neighborhoods. We also want to make sure that we're balancing enrollment overall between all of the different schools, making sure that some schools aren't underutilized where others are severely overutilized with a lot of portables, and try to distribute that as best we can, And that segues well into our next point in terms of our use of portables and porta-packs to accommodate some of that that overutilization at some schools, making sure that it's not all one school community that's having to bear the weight of having portables. Because in reality, you know, given the fact that Milton is very young and has a lot of growth happening within it, portables are a reality. So how do we best distribute those assets? Transportation is another one that we also want to be very cognizant of. And going back to that proximity to school and creating that neighborhood model, we want to make sure that if we have to use transportation, we're being effective and we're using it only when we need to and where there's no other alternative. So we can really support that walk to school model. And it ties well into fiscal responsibility, where we're trying to keep the resource that we have in the classroom where possible and avoid spending it in temporary accommodations and things like that. And last but certainly not least is really the student experience, making sure that students are well in their school and have a good experience. And this has a number of considerations. A couple of them to mention are, you know, making sure that we're keeping cohorts together, we're not dividing neighborhoods, and that we're minimizing the number of moves on an ongoing basis through bound reviews. So these are a lot of the considerations we had in refining and developing the options we have to present to you tonight. Now we'll jump into the option review segment here, where we're going to go through these three, the three shortlisted options. And before that, I just want to give you a little bit of a walkthrough of what some of the materials you're going to see in a few moments looks like, so you can situate yourself as we go through these options. So first and foremost, what we did to start is we took the study area that we discussed earlier that was bound from Tremaine to James Snow, Louis to the north, and Britannia to the south, and we subdivided it into 10 different zones. And what these zones are meant to represent are geographical areas that represent kind of a neighborhood scale model. So these are areas that we want to subdivide, and then we're using these to put them together or combine them together to create the overall boundaries. And what we've done is we've created a total of 10, A through J. And as we go through the options tonight, what I'll be explaining to you through the narrative is where these zones were originally from and where they're being directed to for the English as well as the French immersion boundaries. The next one is the maps that we'll be presenting on screen tonight. Just to orient you a little bit, is the shading in the background of these images represents the boundary for that particular school. So in this instant here, P.L. Robertson is represented in the cyan shading. The thick outlines here represent the secondary school boundaries. And the red schools that are defined in these two areas represent Milton 11 and Milton 12, the new schools that we're opening. And we're also identifying the zones in these areas overlaid on top. So again, we can best situate ourselves. As we're reviewing the options as well tonight, we certainly want to provide you with an overview of what the enrollment forecast looks like for each one of these schools in consideration of the earlier criteria that we were discussing. So each one of these charts, what we're representing in the blue bars, are the number of students that are anticipated for that given year, which is along the x-axis. So it's between 2020 to 2030. The number of students is represented here in white. The second portion or component of these charts that are really important is the overall capacity of the school. So we first have the built capacity represented in gray. So any blue bar that goes beyond the gray is in need of portables. And then the second line in red is the maximum capacity for the overall school. This includes the capacity that's being leveraged from portables. So in this instance, when we near or surpass that red line, that means we're over capacity and we can no longer hold the students on site, which is where these two boxes come into play, where the magenta box represents an intervention such as the opening of a new school, and the red box represents the timing when we go over capacity. And the point is we're trying to make sure that the magenta box comes before the dark red box so that we have an intervention before we reach that or surpass that maximum capacity. So to start us off, we'll start with option number 2. So in this option here, just to start us off, this is one of the options that we've presented that has the introduction of 2 new dual track schools in the South Milton area. So what I mean by dual track is both a school that has the English program as well as the French immersion program contained within it. In this scenario here, we have both Milton 11 as well as Milton 12 having the French immersion program introduced within them, as well as the English program, of course. So with regards to which zones are going where, I'll start with P.L. Robertson and I'll work my way down. So P.L. Robertson here, represented in cyan, is receiving Zone A, which was formerly from Viola Desmond. The Milton 11 boundary is comprised of Zone B, C, and D. Zones B and D, formerly from the Viola-Desmond boundary, and Zone C was formerly from Boyne, which are now being redirected to Milton 11. Viola-Desmond will retain its Zone E from its former boundary and will receive Zone J, which was from Sam Sherritt, closing the distance for student travel. Milton 12's boundary is comprised of Zone F, G, H, F and G, which were formerly from Viola-Desmond, and Zone H, which was formerly from Hawthorne Village. For the FI boundaries in this scenario, for PL Robertson, it is aligning with its English tract boundary. So again, Zone A is being redirected from Viola-Desmond to PL Robertson. Milton 11, again, is comprised of Zone B, C, and D. Zones B and D were formerly from the Viola-Desmond FI boundary, and Zone C, formerly from the Anne J. MacArthur FI boundary. Viola-Desmond will retain its Zone E as part of its FI boundary and will gain Zone J from W.I. Dick and E.W. Foster. Milton 12 will have Zones F, G, and H. That will comprise of its FI boundary, Zones F and G formerly from Viola-Desmond, and Zone H formerly from Irma Coulson. Now, with regards to the overall enrollment projections, what we're going to be reviewing tonight on all three options are Milton 11's long-term enrollment forecast, Milton 12's long-term enrollment forecast, and Viola-Desmond. So in this case, for Milton 11, what we're seeing is that the school will increase in enrollment quite quickly, and on its fifth year, it will surpass its maximum capacity. At this point, because there's no new schools in the west end of the Boyne Secondary Plant, will need an intervention here in the form of a boundary review to redirect some of these students to another location to accommodate that growth. Milton 12, in this scenario here, won't be reaching its max capacity or surpassing its max capacity until 2028. And there is an intervention that's happening in 2024 where the new Milton 13 will be opening its doors, alleviating that future pressure. As for Viola-Desmond, over the long-term projection, it will continue to decline in enrollment, eventually going below its overall built capacity. Now, with regards to a summary of this option here, this option presents two new dual-track schools, so English and FI, FI starting in grade 2. The boundaries well enough align with the neighborhood, so that's really supporting that walk-to-school model or walk-and-roll to school and minimizes transportation where possible. It keeps families together between the English and French immersion program, whereas, as you may have noticed, the FI boundary aligns well with the English track boundary. The majority of schools remain under their max capacity over the next 10 years. The only one that has that surpasses it is Milton 11, which will need relief in 2026, so in over 5 years from now. There are some concerns in around this option with regards to the viability of the French program, which was reviewed with our BRC committee. With just the overall size of the program, not necessarily meeting our total student enrollment that we usually look for. And there's also a split grade 8 cohort in Zone F between Elsie McGill and Craig Kilberger, meaning the students are misaligned as to where their family schools are for that particular area in Zone F. Now for option 4. In this option, we're seeing the introduction of one additional dual track school, and that would be the Milton 12 school, which would have both the English and the French immersion program. And in terms of boundary realignments, what we're seeing is Zone A is being redirected from Viola-Desmond to PL Robertson. And one thing to note, and this also applies to option 2, and apologies for forgetting to mention this, for Zone A, we will only be redirecting a junior kindergarten to grade 2 students as of September 2022. So that means any students that are presently in grades 1 and 2 will not be affected by this. Only the current SK and JK students, as of now, will be moved, and these are students that haven't been moved before from previous boundary reviews. With regards to Milton 11, its boundary will be comprised of Zone B and J. B was formerly from Viola-Desmond, and J formerly from Sam Sherritt. Zones D and E will make up Viola-Desmond's boundary, which it will retain. And Milton 12 will have zones F, G, H, and I to make up its boundary, where zones F and G were formerly from Viola-Desmond, and zones H and I were formerly from Hawthorne Village. For the FI boundaries for option 4, PL Robertson again will gain Zone A from Viola Desmond. Viola Desmond will retain its Zone B, D, and E, and will gain Zone J from WI Dick and EW Foster. Milton 12 will have zones F, G, H, and I, which will comprise of its FI boundary, where F and G were formerly from the Viola Desmond boundary, and H and I were formerly from Irma Colson. With regards to overall enrollment projections in this scenario, for Milton 11, the school will surpass its built capacity within the next 4 years, but will remain under its max capacity over the long term, not requiring any interventions within the 10-year projection. Milton 12 will reach its max capacity in and around, or will surpass its max capacity by 2025. However, it will be alleviated by the future Milton 13 school that's planned for 2024. And Viola Desmond will be in and around its max capacity over the next few years, having a little bit of an extra classroom required in 2024, which could be addressed through an administrative classroom organization change. And after 2024, we'll begin to see some alleviation of its enrollment pressures over the long term, while still maintaining utilization above 100%. So in summary, for this option, we're introducing one new dual track school, being Milton 12. And again, the FI program will start in grade 2. In this case, too, we're looking at boundaries that align well with the residential neighborhoods, which minimize transportation and definitely maximizes the opportunity for walking and rolling to school. We're achieving the goal of maintaining an enrollment balance over the long term, albeit Viola Desmond has that one challenge to address for that one classroom in 2024. And for Milton 12, there is relief with Milton 13's opening prior to it surpassing its max capacity. And again, there continues to be a split grade 8 cohort in Zone F between Elsie McGill and Craig Gilberger. Last but not least is our option 7C. So in this option, again, we're only introducing one new dual track school, being the Milton 12 public school. And in this option, again, PL Robertson is comprised of relatively the same boundary, receiving Zone A from Viola Desmond. Milton 11 is comprised of Zone B, being taken from Viola Desmond. Viola Desmond's boundary is comprised of Zone D and E from its former boundary, and is also receiving Zone J from Sam Sherritt. Zone F, in this instance, is divided into 2 parts. The division is made along a natural boundary, where there's only one connecting road between the northern part of the neighborhood and the southern part. And the southern half of that zone would be directed to Ann J. MacArthur, and the north part of that zone will be redirected to Milton 12. And again, Zone F was formerly from Viola Desmond. The remainder of Milton 12's boundary is comprised of Zone G, H, and I. Zone G formerly of Viola Desmond, H and I formerly from Hawthorne Village. For the FI boundary, again, PL Robertson is receiving Zone A from Viola Desmond. Viola Desmond will have Zone B, D, and E from its former boundary retained. Zone J will be received from EW Foster and WI Dick. For Zone F, again, the southern portion is being redirected to Ann J. MacArthur, and the northern portion is being redirected to Milton 12. And the remainder of Milton 12's French immersion boundary will be comprised of Zone G, formerly from Viola Desmond, and then Zones H and I, formerly from Irma Colson. With regards to enrollment projections in this scenario, for Milton 11, enrollment is going to continue increasing, and it will surpass its built capacity by 2025, but will remain under its total capacity on site for the long term. Milton 12 is anticipated to surpass its max capacity by 2027. However, it will be relieved by the opening of Milton 13 in 2024, well before that time. And Viola Desmond, in this case, again, is going to see some pressures over the next few years, surpassing its max capacity in 2024, but again, alleviating over time as the projection moves forward in the later half of the 10-year term, still remaining above 100%. So in summary for this option, we're looking at the introduction of one new dual track school, being Milton 12 again. In this case, we are seeing that we have to divide a zone, being Zone F, into two parts, the northern half and the southern half, and having to split those between two communities. And the other component of this is that the southern part of Zone F is also being directed outside of the Boyne community, so north of Louis Saint Laurent to Anjay MacArthur. Otherwise, the boundaries do align very well with, again, residential neighborhoods, and we're also maximizing or minimizing the amount of transportation needed in these scenarios while relying primarily on active modes of transportation. We're balancing enrollment overall to avoid over and underutilization in all the schools. Again, we have that one concern of Viola Desmond for that 1 year, but again, could be addressed through some administrative classroom reorganizations. And we do have relief for Milton 12 with the opening of Milton 13, and there continues to be a minor split in this case for the northern portion of Zone F for the grade 8 cohorts. So with that, that is the conclusion of the presentation of those three shortlisted options. Now we're moving on to our Q&A portion of tonight's meeting, where we're going to be receiving questions that are submitted through the form that was presented to you earlier on in communication. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Superintendent Trufant to walk us through this process.
Thank you very much. So for the parents and the community members that are watching, I think we only want to answer questions that are relevant to Milton number 11 and 12 boundaries. I know we're getting some questions that might not be relevant to this preferred boundary review or this specific boundary review. So any question that does come in, we will take note, and there could be a follow-up either by the school principal or Superintendent Zonnefeld or Newton. So I think I'm not sure how many questions have come in, but I'll turn it over to Superintendent Newton perhaps to see if some questions have come in.
Good evening, Superintendent Trufant, and good evening, everybody. Tonight we have had 3 questions that have come in, and unfortunately none of them deal specifically with the presentation that was shared this evening regarding boundary reviews. Again, I would encourage you, if you have questions that are not related to the boundary review this evening, if you can contact your local school tomorrow, or by all means, please contact Mark Zonneveld or myself as the superintendents of Milton. So at this time, we, I think, need to pause for a few moments and see if any questions emerge. So back to you, Superintendent Trufant.
Sure, thank you. So perhaps just to save time, General Manager Thibault, why don't we do part 3 in terms of what next steps, and if some questions come in while you're reviewing that, then we'll do that. And if not, it'll be an early night for the Milton community.
Absolutely. Before I jump into that, for those of us that are attending with us this evening, just so you know, again, you can access the submit question button that's accessible on the main Boundary Review Committee webpage. There is a rolling slider news on the main website, hdsb.ca, that you can access this webpage by. And if you just click on this yellow button here, you'll be able to access another web page. You can insert your question, and then they will show up, and then the Boundary Review Steering Committee will be able to answer those questions. And we'll get back to that after we present part 3. So with regards to part 3, it's really a discussion of what's going to happen next. So in terms of our next milestones, what we're going to be doing is we have opened up a feedback portal for the community to submit their feedback with regards to the options that were presented tonight. And what that feedback that feedback portal will be open till this Thursday, May 13th, till the end of the day. So I do encourage you to submit your questions and feedback so that we can consider them as part of our process. And then the next step afterwards is, once we've received all the feedback and we've closed the portal, we will take that feedback and we will bring it back and present it to our Boundary Review Committee at the next meeting on May 18th for them to review. And again, the feedback form will be accessible on the website that I just showed you earlier. Now, with regards to the proceedings of the next Boundary Review Committee meeting, which will be taking place on May 18th, what we'll do is we'll present them the feedback, and based on that feedback, we'll have a discussion as to whether or not any of the options need any tweaking or readjustments or new considerations that we may have. And then afterwards, we'll leave it to the Boundary Review Committee to provide the steering committee with the recommended options that they would like us to consider and bring forward to the Director of Education as potential options, which will then be presented to the Board of Trustees for consideration and approval at a later time. And again, if you have any questions with regards to this process, again, we encourage you to access our dedicated email, and you can provide us with your questions and we will provide you with an answer as soon as possible. Another point that I'd like to make too is there are opportunities to delegate to the board. If you have anything that you would like to bring forward to the attention of our Board of Trustees, there'll be 2 opportunities to do so, one on June 2nd and the second on June 16th. And the deadline for you to submit your delegation to the board is on May 31st at noon and June 14th at noon, respectively, for those 2 dates. For more information on this, again, I encourage you, once you have access to this presentation on our main webpage, there's a link to our delegation bylaw, which will provide you with the necessary information for you to submit your delegations and how to do so. And the website is also accessible here. And again, if you just go on the boundary review, dedicated boundary review page, it'll provide you with the step-by-step instructions as to where to find this information. And lastly, our next meetings, as I discussed, on May 18th, we're going to be meeting with our boundary review committee. And then afterwards, once we've come up with our shortlisted options that the BRC is going to be presenting to the board for consideration, or the option that we'll present to the board for consideration, we'll let the community know of this. And afterwards, we'll have 2 board meetings to present this to our Board of Trustees, one on June 2nd and 16th, both of those being a time available for you to make delegations if you so wish. And then following the decision being made, which will be done on June 16th, we will notify the community of which option was ultimately selected and approved by the Board of Trustees. So with that, that is the end of our presentation tonight. So I guess we'll go back to the Q&A and see if there's any new questions that we'd like to consider or discuss.
No, I think that is it. I guess we did a great job presenting to the community, and but Fred, all of this information is going to be on our board's website, so parents can go back and take a deeper dive into the information that we presented this evening. They can look at the 3 options. The BRC is meeting once again next week, and they will take any feedback that the community provided to us this evening, and we'll take that into consideration. So I think without any more questions, unless the trustees have anything, we will close off this evening with a sincere thanks to the staff and sincere thanks to the BRC once again, and thank you for watching this evening. All right, Trustee Garrett and Daniele and Gray are all waving goodbye. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening.